All right, this week we've got Andy May on the podcast. If you know anything about whitetail hunting, you know who Andy May is. He works with Osseo Gear, works with Spartan Forge, works with Tethered, but I don't think there's anyone out there that is as good of a hunter with the minimal amount of time that they have as Andy is. Andy hails from the great state of Michigan, but hunts all over the Midwest, Plain States, and does some Western hunting as well. He is the king of scouting, and we covered a lot of ground. So if you're somebody who's looking to pick up a couple tips and level up, here are just a couple of things that we went through. A couple key takeaways from the last couple seasons that he thinks will help him continue to improve, things that he's been focusing on. If you're a hunter that's pressed for time, what are a couple things that you can do to help level up, get better if you're trying to manage a pretty busy life with family, things like that, and still become a better hunter? One of the things that we talked about that I thought was really, really good was scouting, and we actually drilled down on a couple key scouting tips around a number of different types of hunting geographies, including timbered area, ag country like Illinois, Missouri, hill country like PA, West Virginia, as well as the Plain States. And then we kind of wrapped up the podcast talking about his bow setup as well as his arrow setup from last year and what he may be looking at making some changes with this year. We got into releases versus cold weather versus warm weather, index releases versus thumb releases versus hinge releases, broadheads. So it was a wide-ranging conversation, but there's tons of information in here. I've been trying to get Andy on the podcast for literally 6 months, so very excited to have him here. It was a really good conversation. I appreciate you joining. If you enjoy this podcast and you're listening to it on Apple or Spotify, please give me a quick review, give me a rating. If you are over on YouTube, please subscribe to the podcast and give it a like. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. Enjoy the podcast with Andy. Andy May, thanks for being here, brother.
Hey, no problem. Yeah, sorry we couldn't do it sooner. We've been trying to do this for a while. I feel bad.
You're a busy dude, and everybody's trying to get a piece of your time. I get it. And I'm out there just trying to whack my way and learn something, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk hunting, and I enjoy doing these once in a while. I mean, sometimes when there's a bunch of them, it can get a little overwhelming, but I love talking hunting. I mean, those are my people. And, when I haven't done one in a while, I think, yeah, it'd be fun to talk to someone new about hunting. So
that's the key, is to get you when you haven't done one in a while, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I'm trying to ask everybody coming out of last season is, what are a few things, I'm not going to give you a number, but what are, one or two things that either, not necessarily that you learned, maybe you learned something, but maybe it's just something that you've really been working on honing, improving, that you felt like you took a pretty big leap in, that you're really going to spend some time focusing on continuing to drive next year?
Yeah. I don't know that I feel like I took a big leap or a big improvement in anything, this past year. That is my mindset. I'm always trying to improve and get better, but I don't feel like I make huge jumps anymore. I think it's like gradual things. Being a bow hunter.
Yeah, I was going to say, what did you have that was like maybe gradually, you've noticed, hey, just as I've chipped away at this has made a big difference over the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Being a bow hunter, because it is tough. It just, you can sometimes have a few good seasons and you feel like, you kind of feel like you got it down, but then, the reality of bow hunting sets in, and then it kind of reveals over time, like maybe some weaknesses that you have. And for me, I mean, I'm no different than anybody else in that matter. So like the last few years, I don't even want to say, maybe it was overconfidence. Yeah, I guess it could be overconfidence, even though I didn't at the time. It's not like I was feeling overconfident, but I think I started getting a little careless with my setups, kind of getting away from, or not ignoring, or maybe not giving enough attention to the basics of, it sounds so stupid, but, picking trees where you're concealed more, or, not moving when you're in the tree. I noticed, more and more, I feel like the last few years I've been getting like picked off and busting more deer unintentionally, and just kind of like real basic stuff. But when you think about it, I mean, those are the pillars of success, is like staying concealed, not moving, playing the wind so they don't smell you, being quiet and stealthy so they don't hear you. Very simple, kind of boring stuff. But sometimes when you maybe, or at least in my case, when I've had some success, you start to feel like you can pull off things, and maybe not give some of that stuff the attention that it really needs. I feel like I'm always sneaky. I feel like I'm always stealthy. I'm always trying to be quiet. But I started to feel like maybe I can be, get into some spots that maybe the average hunter, couldn't get in there and pull off. And I felt the confidence to be able to do that, or set up in a tree that isn't ideal, where I'm not real hidden, but, I'll be still enough, or I'll blend in enough, or I'll get the shot off before the deer sees me, or, and I feel like as a result of that, like I've been busted more, like when I feel like I shouldn't have been busted, like deer spotting me from a ways away because I stick out like a blob, and just being a little careless with my setups.
Have those times been like, well, what percentage of the time do you think you're in a tree versus on the ground now? But just whitetail hunting, I guess, like not Kansas or some of those open plain states, but more normal, Midwestern states. What percentage?
It really ends up varying. It really ends up varying, like what deer I'm after and where I'm at. Like for instance, this year, I was chasing a buck in Ohio, and I was on the ground 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the other time I was in a tree. I was in one or two trees, and I was maybe 5 feet up,
Yeah.
It's a more open type country, a more open type terrain. And the way it lays out, I feel like I'm more at an advantage when I'm on the ground and kind of moving around, kind of slipping around, or maybe hunting from the ground. And then if I observe something, I'm much quicker to be able to adjust and move because of just the nature of that type of ground in that area. Small woodlots, hedgerows, real flat. You can see a long ways, lots of open ground, and the deer are often, I can often spot them in the open. And then if I'm on the ground, then now I can play the wind and maneuver. And I feel like that's an advantage, where if I'm in a tree, maybe I'm in a decent kill spot, but I don't have the visual advantage that I feel like is beneficial to me in that setting. Whereas opposed to like some of the Michigan deer I was after, I was in a tree more often, even though I ended up killing my Michigan buck from the ground as well. But I don't know. It just really varies. But I hunt from the ground a lot. I hunt low a lot, and then sometimes I hunt high. So,
well, I was going to ask you about that. So I read an article that you wrote in Saddle Hunter this past year, and part of that article talked about like how hunting low from a saddle was something you did pretty frequently. Can you talk a little bit more about, what situations might cause you to do that, and, where the advantages of that are?
Yeah. So, I don't hunt the same properties or the same trees very often. Of all the bucks I've killed, they come from many, many, many different states, different counties, different cities, different properties. Very, very few are they like, off a property that produces every year. So because of that, and the way I hunt, I feel is on the aggressive side. I like to get in there with the deer, close quarters, and often because of that, that's one of the reasons I blow so many deer out and I get busted a lot. But I think it's also the reason I get more encounters and more shot opportunities.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's kind of the nature of the beast, right? But like you said, you're going to get a lot more encounters just by the nature of being more aggressive.
That's right. Yeah. And what I find is like, when you get in that tight on deer, sometimes getting up into the tree, at 12, 15, 20, 25 feet, it's more commotion. It's more noise. I'm eliminating shot opportunities the higher I get because they're not presets. They're not trimmed. Now, if the tree sets up well for that, I'd rather be up, 20, 25 feet, out of their visual peripheral vision and, get a kind of a scent advantage. But a lot of times when I get up high and I haven't been able to trim, I actually lose a visual advantage because now I'm up in the canopy a little more and I bring a lot more, especially before the leaves fall, a lot more vegetation and limbs and stuff into my sight picture.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like don't you think it's easier to get high when you're doing pre-hung stands and you're going out and setting sets up ahead of time. But when you're mobile like you are, it's much more difficult in many situations.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times I'm like, I feel like the deer is here, like in this thicket or in this tiny woodlot. And I am moving in like I'm stalking, like I know where he's at. So I'm moving in so slow, keeping in mind the rhythm of the woods. If it's windy and, there's a nice breeze, I can move a little quicker. If it's really dead quiet and crunchy, I'm like, it's like I'm on the stalk of my life trying to get to a certain spot. And then I just want to get in undetected and just be ready. So a lot of times in those cases, I will hunt literally with my feet on the ground. If I'm not in like a little makeshift brush blind or in like a little, out of the way or somewhere I can feel like I can be hidden, I'll find a nice tree, a good sized tree that can hide my profile, and I'll set up with a saddle right behind it. Now my feet might be on the ground or they might be 6 inches off the ground, or I might get, 5, 6, 10 feet up. It just kind of depends where I feel like I can be most hidden, but still have the shot opportunities that I want.
So you might you might hook the saddle up to the tree and still have your feet on the ground, actually.
Yeah.
What's the advantage? Just being able to move around the tree, essentially.
Yeah. And it's more of a comfort thing. I'll clear out the debris like around the tree so I can move and rotate around the tree without making noise.
That makes a lot of sense.
And you might say like, well, why don't you just stand there? Well, I mean, you stand there, it's like, you start to fidget more. Maybe you get a little uncomfortable. You start to move a little more. And like when my feet are on the ground, it's like I can lean back. I'm comfortable. If I need to adjust something or I need to relieve like some tension off my hips or something from the saddle, I'll just stand. So like for instance, last year I snuck into this little tiny. It's a decent sized hedgerow, but it's relatively small. It's wide. It's not real long, but it's really thick in there. And the buck that I was after was bedding in there often. And I got a really nice windy day in November. It was like the second week of November. And I snuck in there and I was just, the conditions gave me the approach and it allowed me to be undetected because of the noise, because the leaves are down. It's late November. It's crunchy, but there was a good breeze. So I was able to get in there. I got in there tight. What I thought was I know where they bed in there, and I was within 70 yards. And I use my instinct a lot in that, of like, how close can I get? And I don't want to be too far, because then I'll be out of the game, and I don't want to get too close because I don't want to bump them. So I rely a lot on feel, how I feel I can get in there and how close. And then that's how I set up. And I wanted to set up that way because now I can rotate around the tree. I can sit there more motionless. But if I see him exit a different way, boom, I'm unhooking the saddle and I'm out. I'm on the chase. I'm stalking. I'm trying to cut him off. That's exactly what ended up happening. So he was right where I thought he was. I was hoping he was going to come through the hedgerow. I was in like the middle of a forked tree, so I had some really good cover there. And I was hoping he was just going to come down the hedgerow and give me like a 30 and in shot. Well, what he ended up doing was, I had a doe that came out of that hedgerow a direction that I wasn't planning on, and she kind of fed out in this cut cornfield. Well, she came down towards me and then circled in back to the hedgerow in front of me. And when he got up, he went out to look for her, and then he got on her trail and he kind of lost it. Well, he starts kind of nosing around out in that field, and I see him out there. I unhook the saddle and I go right to the field edge and get down on my knees. And here he comes, because I knew he was going to end up picking up that trail and follow it. Well, he ends up picking up her trail, and here he comes paralleling it. And that's when I got my shot. So it just gives me, in a lot of scenarios, I like to be low, because when you're low, a lot of time, in a lot of cases, you can see better than when you get up high and you bring in a lot of canopy. There's other scenarios where you get up high, like maybe in a marsh or a swamp, you get up high, you can see better up high. So it really depends on the type of cover and vegetation. But by being low and in that type of country where you can observe, I like the speed of being able to get down. If I'm 5 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, I get down quick. Or if I'm on the ground, unhook that saddle. And now I'm in a situation where I'm on the ground, he's on the ground, and we're trying to play that game. So I like that. And I've killed a lot of deer using that type of style.
Actually, really, I think that's got so much validity, though, because I've only been hunting for a couple of years, but I experimented this season. I tried to do some stuff from the ground, and that was one I found was one of the biggest problems for me, was just like you said, getting a little fidgety with your feet. You're standing in that same place for an hour and a half because you feel like you're in the right place, and you leaves or whatever, you step on a stick, getting lazy or whatever, and it's like, but if you're 2 feet off the ground on that saddle, on that stand, you can move all over the place. But like you said, you can just get down and move. You got the best of both worlds. Yeah,
I have trouble. I have a bad back. My back gets really stiff when I don't move, or when I'm seated, or even when I'm just standing. So like me, like just tucking in the ground and like sitting on the ground or on my knees, I won't make it 5 minutes without
I've had 3 back surgeries.
And then all of a sudden I'm moving and I'm like stretching. So I prefer to either stand, which I get really sore standing, also not moving. So I prefer, if I can, just hook that saddle behind a big tree. Now I got this big tree blocking me. I can peek out. I'll pick a big one when I'm doing that, something that hides my profile. But now I have the ability to stand, take that pressure off the saddle. When I get, lower myself back down. Now I'm leaning. That feels good. If I need to sit, I'll just let some line out of that tether and get a little lower, so I got more weight in my butt area. So it's more of it's just me and my body and how do I feel most effective. Some of these young guys, I know they can sit on their knees, put their butt on their heels and sit there for an hour or two. Like
I don't even get that, man. Like I can't do it for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I can't do it. No, I can't do it. I'm 47 years old. I got major arthritis in my shoulder. I had a back injury. I've had multiple knee surgeries. It's like, I do better where I can move. And that's why, like, too, a lot of times when I saddle hunt, I do more of not all the time, but especially if I'm going to be in the tree a long time, I'll do like a hybrid style. So I'll use like a real small, lightweight hang on, like a Lone Wolf Custom Gear 0.5 or a Lone Wolf Ranger hybrid, something where, yes, I'm saddle hunting if that's what it sets up best for, but I have the ability to turn around and sit in a tree stand. And just that little change, it keeps my hips more loose, gives me more time in the tree, so I'm more effective. So as I age, comfort is becoming more of a priority, where when I was younger, I could kind of tough it out because the injuries and the arthritis and the stiffness wasn't as bad. And I could just tough out, 13 hours in the saddle. I still can, but now I'll pay for it. So if I bring that hang on, it's like I can saddle hunt and I'm super comfortable. Usually I can stay there for hours and hours, but then maybe I need a little break. I turn around, let some lead out of the tether, and I sit just like a traditional tree stand. Gives me a little break. Then I can stand, on the tree stand, hunt out of it like a typical tree stand, or I just start leaning again like a saddle. So it gives me some versatility there and comfort. And also just that style, that hybrid style is very versatile because, as you've probably noticed, some trees set up really well for a saddle. Yeah. Some trees set up really well for a tree stand. And I like having that ability to adapt to the situation with exactly what it needs, and not trying to cut some corners. Like, this sets up better for a tree stand, but I'll hunt out of it on a saddle, even though I'm going to stick out and look funny. I prefer not to do that. And if that's the case, if I find a tree like that and I got my saddle and I got my saddle platform, what I'll do is I'll set that platform and I'll just stand with my back to the tree the whole time and just be one with the tree if it sets up better, like facing that direction. So it just depends. Every tree is different. The way the cover lays out is different, and just every situation. So I like to be adaptable.
If you're running that hybrid setup like that, because I actually thought about that this year multiple times when I was like an all-day situation out of state, and I had taken my saddle with me, and it was like 2 PM, and I was freaking dying. And I'm 58, so it's like I'm kind of dealing with a lot of the same stuff you are. And I was like, man, I wish I had a tree stand right now. Mm-hmm. But like, so when you do something like that, where you're running one of those smaller stands like that Lone Wolf, and you're kind of rotating back and forth between saddle and sometimes just sitting on it, do you still feel like you can run that low? Or if you're going to sit in it, do you feel like you got to run that higher because of your profile?
I mean, yeah, hunting low,
you need to be basically behind the tree, right?
Yeah, you would definitely, if you're going to hunt it low, you definitely want to be in it more like in a saddle situation where you're facing the tree and using the tree as cover. Now, obviously, some trees you have no problem getting in it low with a tree stand if there's multiple trunks, or maybe like a cedar, or something that has a lot of cover at that height. Then it's no big deal. But yeah, I don't like to be moving. I try not to move a lot anyway. That actually keeps me from moving less, believe it or not. Like, yes, I might sit in a saddle position for an hour, and then I might turn and sit for an hour. But like, that keeps me more still during those hours, as opposed to where I was just sitting or just saddle hunting. I start to do this, I'm stretching my back, and it's like I'm fidgeting more because I'm not changing position. But yeah, like, you don't want to be moving, big movements like that low on the ground. Deer have a way to, a really good knack for picking that out. But then you also got to just, make sure before you move, just get in the habit. And I've had to like relearn this. It's super basic, but just get in the habit of, like, before I do any movement, I scan, and I'm just really thorough and make sure nothing's there. And then I do like a, really slow, deliberate movement, change that position, and then I'm still again.
Yeah. So I know you're a super busy guy. We talked about that one ahead of time, and anybody that's listened to you on podcasts before knows that you're constantly moving, work, juggling family, all that kind of stuff. What advice would you give to newer hunters? I mean, there's a lot of people who are starting hunting later in life, people like me, who may have had like completely different careers or something like that. Now they finally got time to do it, that have a lot of time limitations but one or two things that they could really do to level up from kind of beginner or, novice level to becoming a pretty decent intermediate, level hunter, knowing that they don't have all the time in the world to be committing to, like, when you're, 20 years old and you're not married and you don't have kids.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple ways to answer that depending on what their goal is. If they just want to hunt and shoot some deer, I would have some different advice. But if they want to,
I want to be a good bow hunter.
I want to shoot some nice bucks.
Right? Yeah. But not necessarily, like, I kind of align, and at least a lot of the people that I talk to align with you in terms of, it's not like I have to kill the biggest buck in the world. I want to shoot something nice, but I want to be better at being a bow hunter.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I definitely, one tip would definitely be, reach out to maybe a local guy or a friend that they have. And, or maybe, some of the personalities, in the hunting world, and, definitely ask questions. Learning from people that are better than you is a great way to kind of fast track that learning. When you do it on your own, that's awesome. There's a lot of like satisfaction in that, but it's going to be a slow road. So it's nice to be able to bounce questions and ideas off people that they don't have to be the best hunter in the world. They just have to have more experience than you and be a decent hunter. That's why I say, if you can find a friend or someone local, that's great to just kind of network like that and, get some tips. Certainly I recommend, gather information in that way. Podcasts are great. But you can really, in this day and age, there's tons of information. You can really bog yourself down. So I don't think you should like listen to a million different guys talk. It's fine to do that and listen to their perspective. But if you're trying to like take that in and, employ it and take this guy's stuff in and his style and this guy's style and what he's saying, you're going to get really jumbled up. So if you find somebody that maybe you admire or hunts an area similar to yours, or has a style that you'd like to maybe not copy, but learn, maybe focus on that. That's kind of how I started. There was like, a guy that I admired and I kind of like followed his style and talked to him. And, I reached out to him and learned, and then, read books and articles and stuff. And then once I felt like I kind of had that style down, then I started to, figure out that other people were doing things differently, that I wasn't doing it. And that made me want to learn different aspects and styles of hunting. So definitely reach out, take information in, but try to kind of pick a lane and learn that, as opposed to like just dipping your toe in the water in a bunch of different types of stuff, because then I feel like you can kind of go nowhere fast. Definitely, if you're like, probably the average guy, our age or a little younger, like you're married or have a relationship, you might have kids, and you always got to prioritize that. But there's nothing wrong with having a passion. There's nothing wrong with communicating that with your partner. And it should be communicated, that it should be communicated that this is important to you and that you want to spend some time doing that. Prioritize scouting. If you can't get out and hunt a lot, then you got to put in more time scouting so that your hunting is more effective. So in the off season, regularly get out and scout, learn the areas you want to hunt, decide if they're worth hunting, set some goals and try to decide, is this area capable of, am I capable of reaching the goals I want to reach in this area?
So this may sound like a basic question, but it kind of piggybacks right off of what you're saying right there.
Yep.
For people that weren't raised, which same situation you came from, like dad didn't hunt. My brother kind of learned on his own growing up, but I didn't grow up around a family full of hunters, so I wasn't taught woodsmanship. And that's such a big, everyone says get out and scout, but if you're still figuring out like what am I doing when you're out there, what are if you said, hey, these are the top 2 or 3 things that you really need to focus on to begin with to start becoming strong in woodsmanship, what would those things be?
Yeah, learn, spend as much time as you can in the woods. Be attentive. Don't just wander around the woods. Go in the woods with a purpose. Like, I want to know if this deer holds woods. I want to know if this deer holds mature, or this woods holds mature deer. I want to learn how the deer move through this type of terrain. Learn to read sign, walk the trails, see how they move through, look at the droppings, look at the tracks, look for rubs and scrapes, and kind of see how everything ties together. Learn what the deer eat in that area. Learn where they like to bed in that type of terrain, where the water sources are, and how all those things connect. You got to be taking this information, but at the same time, breaking it down, looking at maps, breaking it down in your head, like where these deer are living, how they're using this terrain, and how are they getting from point A to point B, in the early season and the late season, and how are they using this area during the rut? Where are the does, the concentrations of does? Where's the concentration of buck sign? Is this buck sign that, kind of relates more to bedding? Because there's like clusters of it and big sign, like in a small area. And it's like, oh, and there's a nice thicket here or a marsh with an island out there. Then you start to pick up like, oh, this might be like a buck bedding area. This is where he's spending a lot of time. So I'm going to go look on that island, and you find a bed that's worn down to the dirt. So, that's a whole different type of scenario than finding, rubs on a ridge or, through a funnel or kind of scattered around. When you find a lot of doe tracks, and then kind of rubs and scrapes that are kind of scattered, that tells me that that's an area that is more used during the rut. So you start to pick up on that. There's a big disadvantage, I think, for new people coming in, because you're coming into the most advanced technological age of deer hunting that there's ever been.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, you're at a major disadvantage.
It's easy to lean on it as a crutch.
You're at a major disadvantage if you jump into that route and ignore the other stuff. Yes, you can go and hunt that way and be successful. I mean, you see guys that are in their 30s that have killed more big bucks than some of the bow hunting legends that came before us. I mean, like, not even close. And they're in their mid to early 30s. They're smart. They're good hunters. They got the drive and the passion, and they're maximizing the technological advantage. Good or bad, that's what's here. So it makes me really sad when all the deer stories revolve around, cellular cameras and corn piles and everything. And I want to do what I can to make sure that woodsmanship, scouting, reading sign, reading terrain, and understanding deer behavior and deer tendencies in different types of habitat and terrain, that stays alive. Because if you can do that and utilize some technology, the technology that you feel is fair chase, that you feel is okay to use, and that's a personal thing. I'm not hating on anybody that does anything legal. Everything's legal right now, so knock yourself out. I think some of that will change, but if you learn the basics of finding deer, and then being able to get on some good bucks using woodsmanship and scouting, then you incorporate maybe some trail cameras or some glassing, some of this other stuff. Now you become super effective. You can go anywhere because you can read sign. You're not just relying on a camera to tell you when a deer is in there. You can you start to develop these skills where you can go anywhere and get on deer. You don't even need a camera. I don't use cameras out of state. I get on deer just fine. I get on big bucks just fine. So it's but people that are coming in now, there's nobody talking about that anymore, hardly. Like all the guys that hunted that way, the guys that I learned from, they're all old now, and some of them are not even talking about it anymore. Like Bobby Worthington and Miles Keller, and all these guys. You just don't hear from them, and a lot of these new hunters don't even know who those guys are. So
yeah, anytime I can catch Bobby on something, I'm listening to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he uses technology, and it's fine. But like, there's a lot of years he didn't. He's got a ton of deer knowledge that would just blow out anybody that's just coming up these days.
Yeah.
And it's not a competition or anything, but what my point is, like, if you can learn to find deer and find good bucks through hard work and scouting and woodsmanship, then the technology piece, that's just like, that supplements that. And now you become a really effective, deadly hunter. My advice for the new guys coming up is spend more time scouting. If you're limited on time hunting, spend more time scouting so that your hunts are more effective. That is my style. I hunt way less than, my buddies, way less than my buddy Mark Kenyon, way less than my buddy Tony Peterson, way less than pretty much all of my friends. Maybe a handful of other guys that have young families that don't get out as much. I might hunt a little more than them, but way less. But I also scout way more. And that's why my hunting is more effective, even during the season. Could I hunt more days? Yes, I could hunt more days, but I like my hunts to be very precise. I like them to be very high percentage. So I choose to scout for a couple reasons, because I want that high percentage sit when I decide to hunt. And two, I'm still trying to prioritize family. I'm not trying to burn my family out, and I'm not trying to not be there. So it's much easier for me to scout after work for 2-3 hours and then be home for dinner, as opposed to, hey, I'm going hunting again. You haven't seen me all week. I'll be home at, 9:00.
Yeah.
And I don't really want, at this point in my life, I don't want to do that. I like scouting and I like gathering information. And then when I feel like I'm ready to go in for the kill, then I go in for the kill and I have a high percentage sit. So that's my style, and might not be for everybody. A lot of people I don't know how these young guys do it. They have so much time. I mean, I don't know how they do it. Like, how are you doing?
I guess they're making their money on YouTube, so they can go out and hunt and get paid to do it. Yeah. They're not working jobs like we were.
Like, I was at the show. This one guy told me he hunted over 100 days. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I hunted 26 days, and that was a lot for me. So,
I think that's about how much I got out. I don't even think it was 26 days. I think it was a total of like 32 sits or something like that.
Yeah, 26 days, where most of those were like
not full days,
a morning or an afternoon after work. But yeah, it was. I mean, I was satisfied, but I could have hunted more, but I scouted more, and that's just my style. And maybe that'll change, when I have more time freed up. I don't know. I like that. I like scouting, and I don't like sitting and going in somewhere where I don't have the confidence that that I have a pretty good chance of getting a crack at something.
Well, so I coached football for a long time. Mm-hmm. That was like kind of what I did in a former life. And you approach it like a coach, you're analyzing, breaking down. Like, teams don't go out on the field and slog around and hope they find something that works. They put a strategy together and they practice that strategy, and then they implement it when they think it's going to work. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're doing. So
yeah, like, I would be the type of coach that if you could do it this way, like, I would go watch that other team play, and I would form a plan, and I would say, okay, I'm watching this defense. I see their weakness here. I see the way, I see this formation. I see some openings, or I see this, the corner on the left is weak. And, and then offensively, I'm doing the same thing, looking for that weakness and where that weakest link is. And then when I felt like hey, I got a good chance of beating this team. If I coach my kids this and teach them this, then it's like, okay, now we'll play. Let's play now, you know?
No, I used to
yeah.
have I called them so every game I would go into, I was an offensive coordinator, and every game I would go into, I had stuff that I liked against all their different sets, but I had like 4 or 5 things in every game that I felt like if they give me that look, I can run this and I'm 80% chance of scoring on it. And I was just waiting to see that, and it was kind of the same thing. So I'm going to expand upon what you just said a minute ago, and I'm going to throw a couple different, you talked about scouting. I'm going to throw a few different geographical types at you so that, for people who are trying to get better at scouting and maybe traveling more or going into different kind of areas, a couple things that when you go into a geographical area like that you think are, paramount when it comes to scouting. Let's just start with like ag country. Like if somebody's traveling to the Midwest, whether it's like a Missouri or an Illinois or an Ohio or something like that, where they've got a lot of flat, lots of ag with some, some timber in the middle, but you're dealing with a lot of that. Like, how do you scout something like that?
Yeah. So, that type of ground, everybody thinks, hunting ag ground is easier. And I think in some ways of, as well as far as like figuring out deer movement and where deer are, because the food sources are very obvious. It might be, but at the same time, those areas tend to get a lot of pressure. So you get a whole different set of difficulty with that type of ground, where as opposed to like maybe big hill country, it's harder hunting, but you get less pressure. So the deer move a little more, a little further distances, a little more in daylight. So there's challenges with each, but hunting ag ground, I mean, obviously you're going to scout around food sources. That's going to tell you, where the deer are eating. You're able to see tracks really well in like bean fields and cornfields, alfalfa. You'd be able to tell what kind of like deer density is there, even if there's, some good bucks in the area by cutting a good track. So a lot of times my scouting might start on the edges of that, where it's adjacent to something that looks like it would hold deer. And where for me in particular, because I'm after, maybe a higher caliber of animal, something that has a little age to it, I'm looking at something that an area, a piece of cover, or something that tells me a buck could get old there, or that's the type of cover that, tends to hold, older bucks. It could be a swamp or marsh that's in ag ground that butts up to that, or it could be a big chunk of timber, a big chunk of timber where it's got the depth and it's got the high stem count, or it's got the vegetation type in there where the deer can be in there and be hidden, not like open park type woods. So if I saw that, like if I was scouting and I'm walking through the field and I see some tracks and I'm like, oh, there's a few deer here. And then I go into the woods and it's like, I can see 100 yards. It's kind of open, not a lot of undergrowth. Like I'm not going to waste my time there because the deer I'm after aren't in that type of cover. So, they want secure cover. It could be in ag ground. It's a lot of times it's a swamp or marsh. It's a larger woods or a densely covered woods, that has, briars in it, or just vegetation that's more at that deer height, so that the line of sight is very short. Like deer can be in the cover and stay hidden from, all the activity that's out in the farm fields. River bottoms, creek bottoms, that kind of thing. That's a lot of times you'll see that in ag country. Some ag country, like where I hunt in certain parts of Ohio, like on the north side of Ohio, it's really tiny woodlots. You'd almost look at it on an aerial and like, why would I even hunt here? And sometimes I ask myself, why am I even hunting here? But it's just close to home. And yes, they're not growing big Boone and Crockett bucks, hardly at all, because it's effectively hunted, but there's still deer there. There's still nice bucks there. And, that brings up a whole new set of challenges because the cover is very limited. It's hard to get even to the edge of that cover without alerting deer. But the scouting is the same. I start usually around the food source. I identify, by doing that, walking that food source, a lot of times you can see where they're coming and going, through the trails that are coming out of the cover. And then I'll follow those back and I'll read the sign. I'm looking at maps and I'm like, oh, okay, there's a little river bottom, back here, a half mile or a quarter mile. And there's some bends in the river. It's got some S bends. And when I see an S bend, I know there's going to be a crossing there. There's always a crossing like in the middle of the S. So, there's some little oxbows there. It's some river bends where it creates like a little loop. I know there's going to be, that's where the deer bed and river and creek bottom. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to scout those and break it down and really look at, is this holding the type of deer or the amount of deer that I want, the caliber of deer. Is this where I could, possibly have a good hunt? So it really just depends. There's ag grounds. It's actually very diverse because you could have a swamp, you could have a marsh, you could have a woods thicket, you could have thick hedgerows. When the corn is up, that's cover. Sometimes the deer, when there's really high pressure in the woods, they're bedding out in the food, they're bedding in the standing corn or even in the standing beans. There's river bottoms, there's creek bottoms, there's pretty much even hill country in some ag ground, like they're coming off the ridges down to the ag, or they're coming out of the valleys, the drainages, and coming up to the ag.
I was just actually
like that.
So I was thinking about an area in Illinois that is very much like that. There's that I hunt that's got a pretty big ridge system that just kind of falls right down into the ag.
Yeah. So the benefits of farm are the food sources are very obvious. I think they're easier to scout. Even finding bedding locations are easier to scout. Travel routes, a little more obvious. A little, because deer are condensed and more, because a certain amount of the landscape is taken up in food, deer are going to be more condensed in the cover areas. The hard parts of it, it's usually higher deer density. It's usually higher pressure. Unless you're hunting like a really good piece of private ground, or a lease where nobody else is hunting, or like a piece of managed land. A lot of times, or like a really good state like Iowa or something, a lot of times deer in those types of areas in farm aren't reaching that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. A lot of times a mature buck there, like here in Michigan or in Ohio, it's a 4-year-old buck, maybe a 5-year-old buck if you're lucky, and very few of those because it's more effectively hunted. They're susceptible to deer drives. Like I said, all that stuff is a little more noticeable, and it tends to get higher pressure. So there's some difficulty there, and there's some things that are easier.
So what about hill country? Let's and I don't have a ton of experience in this, but whether it's states like PA or West Virginia or places that are really, lots of elevation change, lots of ridges, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the same thing. Well, with hill country, obviously the challenges there are identifying food, and it can vary. Yeah. Where I hunt in Southern Ohio has a lot of different food than some of the areas in PA. Like some of the areas in PA, there's no oaks, and they're eating on fern bulbs and, different things like that we just don't have around here. So identifying like what the food sources are and being able to see and identify those, and then going in and finding ridges and drainages that have, those foods, whether it's greenbrier or oaks. And then there's all kinds of different oaks that germinate at different times. Some are really good early, some are good more mid-season, and then some like chestnuts or blacks are good late season. So just because of when they fall or the order of which deer prefer them, some of them are very bitter tasting, and those are the ones that'll be left over late. So they're a great draw late. Learning that, and then learning the way the deer navigate through hill country. Now that can be challenging because you're in there and it's nothing but woods, and it can be a little overwhelming. But once you hunt it a little bit, it actually becomes a little more obvious. There's certain terrain features where deer tend to move through. It doesn't mean they can't go over that big steep ridge. They can, especially if they're fleeing, but they're not going to do that natural movement. So the more you go in there and you scout, you see how these trails wrap around the head of a drainage, or they go through a saddle, or there's this really steep side here, and they get a little, maybe it's like a 35 degree, and then it flattens out just a little bit to maybe like a 25, and then it's steep again. Well, that's a little bench, and they'll use that when they're wrapping around, that ridge. So that the challenge there is finding out how the deer utilize the terrain, which does take some time and takes some experience, finding out what the food sources are, finding where those food sources are, because yes, they might be eating the white acorns, but where are they, and which ones are they feeding on now?
Right.
Because you might have cleaned up this ridge and you scouted it last week and there was all kinds of feeding sign. You go up there, you don't see anything. Well, they moved over here because they cleaned that up, and now they're hitting this one.
Yeah.
And finding which areas are dropping acorns and which ones aren't, knowing that if it's a terrible year for acorns, they might not even be in these ridge systems at all, because there's nothing for them. They might be more down closer to some of the private ground where they're baiting, or where there is maybe some ag. So finding all that out, it does require more scouting. And then one of the bigger challenges in hill country is managing your scent and managing the wind and seeing how the wind moves through that country. Because you're not only dealing with winds that are often inconsistent, just because it's inconsistent everywhere, even in flat ground. Like you get, it's blowing out of the south, and it's blowing out of the southeast, then southwest, and the thing, it says south, so it's always doing this, right? But then you get into hill country, it's doing this, but now it's bouncing off this ridge and through this drainage and swirling down here in this bowl, and it's like there's just certain areas where you cannot hunt because of that. And then you're getting a much more thermal activity too. So like later in the evening, when that sun goes down, temperatures start to fall, like everything starts to move downhill. So you got to keep that in mind. Is the wind direction powerful enough at the last hour of daylight to overpower those thermals, or is it more like 4 miles per hour out of the west, but the thermals are actually pulling harder than that, and your scent's just going down? And then the same thing in the morning, your scent's moving down till about, a certain time frame, 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30, when that sun really gets up and starts hitting where you're at. And there's a little, turnover time there where it's kind of like, it's starting to warm up, but it's not quite warming up, and your wind is just doing some weird stuff. And then all of a sudden it's starting to rise. So there's some complicated stuff going on there. It's a little bit harder. But man, the guys that are good in hill country, I think they're some of the best hunters in the world. They scout hard. They know the food sources. They know how to identify all these different types of oaks. They know how deer use terrain, and they know where to look for deer. And so those are the challenges, but you got to get in there and you got to cover some ground, and you're looking for those native food sources. You're looking for deer sign. You're looking for trails, how they move through that type of terrain. And then, you always have to have an understanding of what deer can feed on in that given region, how they travel through there, and where they typically bed. So in hill country, you're going to find a lot of deer bedding on points, a lot of times on the leeward side, which is the downwind side of the ridge, but not always. They will bed in any type of terrain where there's swirling wind.
They like secondary points, primarily.
Not always. Sometimes they're off the main ridge point. The biggest deer I ever saw, well, it's not the biggest deer I ever saw. One of the biggest deer I ever saw in Iowa was bedded off this long, skinny ridge that didn't have any points at all, and he was bedded right at the tip. I don't like to hunt those types of ridges because there's not very much terrain and different. I like having ridges that have a lot of secondary points and bowls and stuff, because it just creates more areas and spots for deer to live and to bed. Right. So, you tend to get more activity. But yeah, secondary points, very common for deer, does, sometimes some bucks, to bet on those because they have the wind coming over their back. They can see down below, and it creates a little turbulence in there where they can scent check a lot throughout their day. That's coming up, up from the bottom and over the top. So they have a lot of advantage there. The other thing they like to bet in a lot in hill country is the bowls, or like the drainages, where you think about, a ravine coming up, and then it creates kind of like a bowl, almost like a stadium, like you're in a stadium and you can see around. They like to bet in there because wind swirls there. So if something comes in or too close, they smell it. It doesn't matter where you're at, they smell it. And they can see, around to the left, they can see around to the right, and they can see down. So a lot of times you'll see them, on the leeward side or on the windward side, or on just the side where the wind's not blowing. But those are the kind of the main things you'll look for in hill country.
Yeah. I mean, where I live in the South, it's very, very flat in most places, but I went to Colorado this year, first elk hunt. And as much as you try to study it, you can't prepare for the way the wind moves the first time you get into a really mountainy or hilly area. It's just like everywhere.
Yeah.
You really have to understand.
It's interesting too. Like a lot of, I have some friends that are really, they live in hill country and they're just killers. They're hill country experts. And a lot of them don't really, I don't want to say they don't pay attention to wind. They do, but they're not like, okay, I'm going here because the wind's out of here. I think a lot of times they're going in and they're scouting, or they're hunting, and then they're checking the wind as they go, see what it's doing at that time frame, and then kind of manipulating that or adjusting, as they get into that area, because it is really hard to predict. Just because it says it's out of the west, it's very likely not going to be out of the west where you end up. So,
well, especially like you said with the thermals, it's going to change throughout the course of the day. And if you're closer to the top and you've got a prevailing wind, then that may, impact, the thermal and all that stuff. There's just so many places that come into play with it. So,
yeah.
You went on an elk hunt this year, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
Yep. I got one. That's my first elk, actually.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I have. I've been on 3 elk hunts. Elk is a very difficult one for me to pull off because of my trips are usually, if they're after August, because in August I do have a little bit of time frame because it's like our summer. I work through the summer at our school, but I have more flexibility to take time off, and then there's a little 2-week period in August where we get off. So like August antelope, Nevada mule deer, some different things that open in August. So elk is a really tough one for me to pull off because it's after September or after September 1st, and I'm back to work. And that is not something that you can pull off
in 2 days,
in 2 to 4 days or 2 to 5 days or whatever. That's a bigger undertaking. So the first time I went, I actually got a shot at a herd bull, and I hit him in the liver, didn't get a pass through, and I never found that bull. So that was really heartbreaking. I shot him on day 4, and I only had 5 days to hunt. So then I started thinking like, well, I'm elk hunting. I had a blast, and I got a shot opportunity at a big bull in that short time frame. So now I'm thinking I can do this. But realistically, if I would have got that bull down, I would have had a day, probably 2 days packing him out. And I flew there, and it's like, okay, now I'm in a situation. And then the second time I went, I got to hunt one day. And then as I was, we were staying in town. We rented an Airbnb, and we were hiking up, doing like kind of day hikes, and then coming back down, and ended up blowing a tire, and went to the tire shop. They put something on there, and then it was a rental car. So I actually had to drive like 2 hours. Ended up spending like 2 days getting that all fixed up. Ended up having to get a new rental car and everything, and it just ate up the whole time. And so that was just a disaster. So then I was kind of like, no more elk hunts until I have some more flexibility with my time, which hopefully is coming in a couple of years. But I did go this year just the way I had a few personal days saved up, and then, Labor Day, in September, and then the weekend. It's like, okay, I can piece together, 5 days here, but I also had a deer tag, and that's why I went. I had a deer tag. I had an elk tag. I could shoot either. I was really wanting to shoot a mule deer, and I ended up getting an opportunity at an elk. So that's why I went on that one, because
Was that Colorado?
No, that was Oregon.
Oh, Oregon. Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. So it was a Roosevelt.
Yep.
Gotcha. Nice.
Yep.
So last terrain feature, or scouting area, is the plains. Have you done Kansas? Some of those plains. I think you've done Nebraska, Kansas, right? Some of those plain states.
Yep.
That's obviously very different.
Very different. Yep.
Give some tips on scouting those if somebody's going to tackle one of those for the first time.
Yeah, those can be harder. Well, I mean, the plain states can vary greatly. So I'm going to focus on the parts of the plain states that are very open, like prairie style, little drainages, little coulees, because there's parts of Kansas that have, some elevation, and they got some, decent size woods and cover, especially like kind of more east. But the more west, central and west you get, it just kind of, it starts to open up more and more. So it's actually easier to hunt, because now, again, the deer are going to be where the cover is. If you go far west, yes, you'll get some deer bedding in those prairie grasses and the CRP and stuff like that. But the little drainages, the little coulees, it doesn't take much. It could be flat and it doesn't look like anything's out there, and you just see a couple trees and a couple like bushes, and then you go out there and there's a little change of elevation, a little drainage, and it could be, it could snake through the landscape, and it could have a ton of deer in it.
What's define a coulee? I've heard people use that term before, but what is it?
It's just it's like a little drainage. It's just like where it looks flat and then it dips down into a little drainage. Maybe it's, maybe
just a smaller drainage,
20 feet down. Yeah. Okay. 15 feet down. And it's cooler down there. They can get some shade, throughout certain parts of the day, because, as the sun's working over, they can tuck on one side or tuck in the kind of the head of that little drainage there, and they can get out of the sun. A lot of times there's trees in those, so they can get, under the shade of the tree. There's little cedar thickets and stuff, but again, it does not take much cover at all. There's some like plum thickets out there and stuff, so it's not really open. It's actually like real thick cover, like real thick tangle, but it doesn't take much to to hold deer. So usually there's if you get into a patch of cover like that, into a little drainage or a plum thicket or a cedar thicket, and you're not finding like rubs and scrapes and stuff, then there's probably a really low deer density there or something. Because the deer are going to be concentrated in those types of areas. So check out for those, in those prairie settings, that's where I'm going to be scouting. I'm going to be scouting those, looking for the buck sign, looking for the scrapes, looking for rubs, looking for droppings, like usual. And then you can see, in Kansas and Nebraska, sometimes you can set up on those things, and it's like, man, I can see forever this way and that forever this way. And you're like, it feels like I'm in the middle of nowhere, but then all of a sudden, like, deer just start materializing. And because the cover is so thin and so sporadic and so spread out, the deer are forced to move more to communicate and to interact with each other. So you get a lot more movement. There's also typically lower deer density, typically good buck to doe ratio. So things like decoying work really well. Things like calling tend to work really well. Rattling, grunting, those things seem to work really well in that setting, because the deer are used to being spread out, and they see deer and they want to go investigate, or they hear deer and they want to go investigate, or they hear bucks fighting and they think there's a doe over there. So boom, here they come. Pretty much you're just scouting where the cover is. And obviously, in any setting, you want to know where they're feeding, where they're bedding. It becomes a little more important when you're in the early and later parts of the season, a little less important, but still very important, like during the rut. Like obviously, the does are still going to be feeding, but you go to a place like Kansas and, man, I mean, on public land, they're not doing it, but like all the surrounding private land, it's just like Ohio, everybody's baiting. So that ends up being a lot of times like a crop field or a bait pile. That's like the food sources there. So
interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, South Carolina is a bait state too.
Mm-hmm.
But at least from what I've seen and just, I don't see really a lot of bigger bucks coming into bait piles. I mean, it's normally lots of does coming into bait piles, younger bucks, but I don't know a whole lot of people that have killed big bucks off of bait piles. And a lot of my friends don't even hunt off of bait anyway, but is that different in some of those other states?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So the big ones are coming into bait piles. Huh?
You'd be shocked at how some of these guys, Ohio and Kansas, that's how a lot of guys have killed some giants. And
wow.
And I don't know why that is, because Michigan used to be a bait state and nobody really killed big bucks off the bait. I mean, yeah, maybe they'd visit them at night or something, or maybe you get one kind of tracking a doe in there during the rut once in a while, but it didn't seem to me like that was a really good tactic. But then again, I feel like I am a student of the game. And when I see a guy that's doing well in whatever strategy he's doing, I want to learn that. That's including a guy that is a bait hunter, because I kind of always grew up like, can't kill big bucks over bait regularly unless you're in Canada and they're just like, it's so cold, they have to eat, right? So I see a guy doing that. I'm like, well, what's he doing different? Like I have a buddy in Maryland that, he loves to feed the deer. He loves getting pictures. He loves getting sheds. And that's his favorite way to hunt. He loves providing food and having all these deer come in, and he just enjoys that, and that's fine. It's legal and he's really good at it, but he never hunts the bait. He never, ever, ever hunts the bait until the buck shows up there and shows some vulnerability. He will feed all year, multiple spots, and never hunt them. There's spots that he has baited for years and years and years and years and has never hunted. So and he's very efficient in that. That deer he wants, boom, shows up, and then he hunts, or it's showing, some semi-regularity. Some come in and they're just like, they love the bait. Other ones are like, they seem much more cautious. They're very infrequent. It's just like any other deer. They have different personalities. But so from what I've learned, I know a lot of guys, like the guys that I know personally that have killed the biggest bucks, like multiple, they're all bait hunters.
Really? Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. They're all
bait like hunters. You said, I don't know a whole lot about it.
All bait hunters, or, I'd have to really go down the list. I'm talking big bucks,
monsters,
big scoring bucks. They're all bait hunters, or they live in, in some place like, maybe Iowa or Illinois, and they're doing the whole food plot game. So that's why I tend to like gravitate towards, and I tend to relate more to guys that are hunting more a situation like me, public land, or maybe like, you're going out of state and you see a deer out there that looks like pretty good. Hey, sir, I'm here for 2 or 3 days. Would you consider letting me bow hunt?
Yeah,
I'll take you out to dinner, or I could do some work around the farm or something like that, or around home, knocking on a door, like kind of that free permission stuff. And a lot of times those people that say yes, they already have people hunting. So it ends up being a pressured situation anyway. But that's the kind of more of that, I guess, DIY public land. It's accessible to everybody if you just ask, or it's just public. That's kind of what I more relate to. But I'm always curious how guys get it done, and I'm always willing to learn. I can learn from a guy that is primarily a bait hunter. I don't have a problem with bait. And if I thought that was if that was the tactic to get, I'm after this buck and it's like, man, he lives over there and really the only way I can get him coming and going, I got to get some does kind of coming and going through the property and maybe he'll come over here during the rut. It's fine. It's not my favorite way to hunt. I don't want to do that, but I would do it. But what I don't want is to be in a scenario where a lot of these guys end up in like baiting wars with their neighbor and they just have to just constantly provide corn. Like that's not for me.
Yeah. If you're not baiting, then you've got no chance because they're baiting next door.
Yeah. Like I'm just not, not into that. But so yeah, there's a variety of ways to do it, but you can learn from anybody. But yeah, I sat down and actually thought about all my friends, the guys that have killed like, 200-inch bucks, big Boone and Crockett bucks. And I mean, by far and large, they were using bait in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not killing the buck with his nose in the corn, but they were using it to keep him in the area or keep does in the area. And that kept him kind of coming and going. And it's kind of surprising, to when you really think about that. But it is what it is.
So last thing, this has been awesome information. I know that you also love to experiment a little bit, or at least kind of check your setup and that kind of stuff in the off season. Talk a little bit about what you ran on your bow as well as what your arrow setups were during last season. And is there anything you're going to do? Anything you're going to try out? Any different broadheads or anything you're going to try out or experiment with a little bit in this off season?
Yeah. So I ran the Matthews lift last year, the 33-inch version. Most of the time, I have 3 bows set up right now, 3 compounds. I have some traditional bows too, but the other 2, one is kind of like my backup, and the other one is like in case of an emergency kind of. But they're all perfectly capable, and I feel confident with all of them. So the Matthews lift I had set up with a 440 grain Rip TKO, 4-fletched with the tack driver 2.75, 300 spine, 100 grain point with a 50-ish grain insert with a collar. So really kind of middle of the road weight, 440, pretty flat shooting, fast. I shot an animal with a Sever hybrid, very good head. Definitely recommend it. Extremely good flying head, very durable, good blade angle. It's got a bleeder blade. I shot 2 with the Mega Meat, another devastating head. They were both, the blades and stuff were just completely trashed after. So I actually bent the ferrule. So that one was done. The other one, the ferrule was still good. So you'd have to, get some new blades. I shot one with what was it? Just a regular Sever 1.5. So not the 1.5 hybrid. Like I have a bunch of those. Still I had several of them. So I shot one with that. And then I took the Beast broadhead out a little bit. I didn't get one shot with that. So I do like trying different heads. But I only try heads that I think that I've seen or proven or that were recommended to me by someone that I know knows what they're talking about, or I see the design and I know it's going to be good. I won't just, grab any. And all of those, with the exception of the Beast head, which I haven't shot anything with it yet, I was confident with, that are really good heads. And I think that one's a really good head too. I just haven't, it hasn't been out long enough to really know. But, so then on my other bow, shorter axle to axle, more maneuverable, a little bit better for saddle hunting. I had run a little bit heavier setup out of that, a little bit like 515 grains, day 6 arrow. Same thing, same type of broadhead setup, but I always carry at least one fixed head in my quiver. And I do that because a lot of times when I'm hunting on the ground and I know I don't have like long shooting capabilities, I'll use the fixed head for a couple reasons. One, when you're on the ground, a lot of times too, when I'm maneuvering around, there's potential for, maybe, shooting through a little bit of weeds or, it's not like I'm shooting through a bunch of cover, but there is potential sometimes like where I've snuck up on deer and they're kind of in this overgrown field and I got a shot, but I got to punch through a little bit of weeds. So I want something with some weight and I want something that has a small fixed head that's just going to be a penetrating monster.
Which fixed head is the one that you like the best?
I have the Day 6 Evo.
Okay.
It's a great head, flies great. If you have adequate fletching, it's got a bleeder blade, does not leave very good blood trails because it's small, but it blows through deer. It'll break shoulders. It's good. And then Grim Reaper, Micro Hades, flies well. Again, devastating broadhead, little bit blood trails because it's a 3-blade. Flies really well. So those two I have a lot of confidence in. And am I changing anything this year? I'm still going to have that 440 grain arrow. I like that as a kind of a do-it-all arrow. I like my trajectory on that. I like it for out west. It's certainly good enough for whitetail. I like my speeds. And then I'll definitely keep the heavy arrow. It's a great arrow. I can still shoot long range with it. You just get more of a drop and more of an arc. That range forgiveness is a little less because it's heavier. So you got to make sure your form is real consistent, because as you get to longer range, not that I'm out there dropping bombs, but you move a little bit or you're off by a yard or something, your miss is a lot more than with that 440 grain arrow. Now, what is a benefit of that heavy arrow with that fixed head is what I call angle forgiveness. So like that 440 grain with a mechanical on there, I got range forgiveness, meaning the deer's out there at 52. I set it to 52. I come to full draw, and now he takes 2 steps and he's at 54. And I aim for the center of the lungs. I can shoot. I'm still going to kill that animal, right? That's range forgiveness. He moved a little. Where that heavy arrow, it might be where I hit the brisket.
Yeah.
What that heavier arrow with the fixed head gives me is angle forgiveness, which is nice for whitetail, meaning when they come in, boom, now they're inside 30 yards. I got a 30-inch draw. I'm pulling, 72 pounds. Got a 500 grain arrow with a small fixed head that's super strong. It really doesn't matter what angle that deer's at. I can shoot it and kill it. Yeah. So angle forgiveness, where the other one, I have to be a little more picky, wait for a broadside quartering away. That one, I can shoot him if he's quartering to a little bit, angle forgiveness. So they both have their advantages. And we all know how a mature deer, once he gets inside that 20, 30, it's a matter of time before he detects you. They are, especially if they're not preoccupied with a doe, it's a matter of time, especially if they're like lingering around, maybe he's coming out of bedding, usually around bedding areas, there's some swirling winds, or maybe it's, at dusk, the wind's really dying down, the wind gets real fickle. It's a major advantage to get the arrow into that buck as fast as you can. So sometimes that angle forgiveness, when he's sitting there and he's quartering to you, and he's like this, it's like, boom, I can slip it right in there. Where that other setup, I'm probably going to wait. So some advantages there, and you got to you got to prioritize what's more important for you. So as far as a release, I've used thumb button for years. I've used trigger often, all high quality stuff using back tension. I don't punch the trigger. The last 2 years I've used a hinge. And really, I shoot a hinge really well. It's probably the release I shoot best under pressure. I use a Sweet Spot Pro. So the way that hinge works, you draw back, and then it's got a safety. So I can't make it go. If I start to panic or something, I got to click the safety. It's just a little button. You just flip it up, and now I can execute my shot. So it forces me to slow down and execute a good shot.
Mm-hmm.
Downside is it sucks hunting with a hinge when it's cold out, because it doesn't work well with gloves. There is a process there that takes time, so a lot of times with bow hunting, it's an advantage to be able to get that arrow gone when you need it to get gone. And with a hinge, yes, I can get it gone quick, but there's still a process there that needs to happen before that arrow's gone. And I used the one with the wrist strap, so it's hanging, and I don't like that. This is, I don't like something hanging from my wrist, and I don't like, okay, I'm ranging. Boom, he's at 32. Okay. Now I grab my hinge. Now I'm looking down, hooking it on the D loop. There was a step there that wasn't necessary, right? And now I'm drawing back. Now I'm settling the pin. Now I'm flicking the safety off. It's all these steps that are starting to make those critical moments take longer. And a lot of times you have more time than you think, so it's not a big deal. But there's some times where things happen quickly, and you gotta go quickly. So this year, I think I'm gonna go back to the thumb or the wrist strap.
Which thumb are you shooting?
I have a stand shoot off now, but for years and years and years, I used a Carter Too Simple.
That's the one I shoot.
Yeah, and I had two of them, and I sold them. I don't know why I sold them. I should have just kept them because I like them a lot, and they're just what I was used to. But I picked up a used stand shoot off because that's one of my favorite ones too. And then my wrist strap, I have a Carter Quickie 2, which was discontinued, but that's my favorite one from Carter. And then I just bought that Stan Solex clicker. So the way that one works is you draw back, wrap your finger around, and you squeeze, and it actually goes to a click. So it's like click. So again, it forces you to slow down. It's like click. Okay, now you execute the shot.
Now you pull through,
which is kind of interesting. I've been messing with it to see if I like it, but I'm always thinking about how I want to be the most effective hunter I can be in a variety of situations. And in some situations, being able to hook up quick, draw back, and acquire that target fast, and then get that arrow gone is an advantage. But then I've also, I'm a guy that's, I get, even still after killing a bunch of stuff, I still get excited. So releases that slow me down are good. So I feel 100% confident in any of these releases. I can take all three of them out right now and drop long range, and they're all right there. So I shoot them all really well. It's just, I like changing things because I'm an archery nerd, but I like some of the advantages of each one. And I'm really just trying to settle in on which one with my style of hunting. Like if I'm hunting from the ground and I'm crawling, I want that wrist strap, because I don't want to I want something that it has an open hook design. I can hook up quick. I can draw, and if I need to, get it gone quick. Where with a thumb, I'm crawling around. Yes, I can have it dangling from my D loop, and they do make Total Peep makes a little release holder that snaps to the string, which is a must if you're going to be doing a thumb button. But you run the risk of hitting the trigger and dropping it or losing it, or you're pulling it out of your pocket at the critical moment to hook up. Those are critical seconds. Same with the hinge. Not great for crawling around spot and stalk, but it's good for up in the tree stand when a deer's coming by and you have time and, you can really settle the pin and go. So I'm just trying to find what's best for my style of hunting. Some of them, speed of execution is a good thing. And other ones, slowing me down and being more accurate when it's under pressure and the adrenaline's pumping is a good thing. So I enjoy trying different things, as you can tell.
What sight are you using?
So last year I used the Option Canyon Pounder.
Did you like that? I don't know. I've never talked to anybody that ran that.
Yeah, it's a really well built, really well thought out release from a guy that's, an elk killer. as far as versatility wise and like capability,
is that a 5-pin that you can swing back to a single pin, right?
Yeah, you could do 5, you can do 8 pins,
Okay.
you can do as many as you want, but I ran a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And then so I have 60 that are fixed, 20 through 60. And then if you want to use the single pin option, there's a hinge on the fixed. You swing that open, and now you have a clear sight picture with a single pin. And what's cool is you have a sight tape on the left side, and then you can have a sight tape on the back side. So you can have 2 sight tapes. So you can use it in 2 different ways. The one on the inside I had for the single pin. So it's like
Under slider.
Yeah. So like when I open that up and now it's a single pin, that's what that sight tape is for.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't need a sight tape for 20 through 60 because they're fixed as long as it's in the home position. Well, on the back side, what you can do is you can set up a sight tape for that bottom pin. And now if I want to practice out to like 120 or something, you have a pin reference where you can do that. Or what I did was I set up that second sight tape for a heavier arrow. So I had, which kind of sounds crazy, but I had a bow that was tuned so well I could shoot my 440, get a bullet hole. I could shoot my 510, get a bullet hole, and I had a sight tape for the heavy arrow, and I had a sight tape for the light arrow. So the downside of it is it's a little heavy. There's a lot to it. It's right in the same ballpark as like some of the top end HHAs and spot hogs and stuff, maybe a slightly heavier. But it's really well built. It's a little complicated when you look at it, but once you read through the directions, it's not bad. So I don't know if I'll stick with that one because it's nice. I know there's a big advantage for like that kind of multi-pin mover, having to dial in the moment of truth is always a risk. Now, if it's out past 60, I want to take the time to dial, but you're elk hunting, and you range an elk and he's at 40, and then, you come to full draw and all of a sudden he runs into 20. Well, now I don't have to adjust my sight. It's a major advantage to have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. But I don't like that sight picture. I'm not as accurate when there's multiple pins and I got all these horizontal bars. I'm not as accurate. I'm accurate enough, but I'm more accurate with a vertical up pin with a clear sight picture, and I dial to that specific yardage. That's when I'm most accurate. That's all the sight picture that I like the best. But you can use like an HHA double up pin, but you got the one set at like 20, and maybe that second pin is like 35 or something. It's great. It's a great sight picture, but now he's at, 32, or, you could probably guess with that second pin, but if he's any other yardages, like you're turning it, you're adding a step, you're ranging, turning, hooking on the release, boom, you're adding steps to that whole scenario. So it's all stuff as you become more of like a veteran in bow hunting, you start to really analyze like, what am I gaining here? What is this costing me? What fits best for my style? What do I shoot the best? What do I shoot the best under pressure? What do I see the best? What kind of sight picture do I like? What release do I execute most accurately in the backyard? That may not be the one that you execute more accurately when you are under pressure. These are the types of things when you start to geek out about it, you really start figuring that out about yourself, and it's different for everybody.
Yeah. The last thing I was going to ask you, and I don't know if there's any difference for this for you or not, but I shot a thumb and I shoot it really well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in Ohio in January, and it was 13 degrees, and I was in, really thick, I was like, Osseo makes great stuff, but their late season jacket is like, I hadn't practiced anything that thick, which problem number one. Right.
Yeah.
So, do you find that when you're having to wear heavy clothing in really cold temperatures, that an index is easier to shoot than a thumb button? Or like, have you ever noticed any difference in that?
Yes. And when it gets really cold, I switch to an index.
Okay.
I do. Yeah. Because
I'm glad I asked you that, because I was wondering that.
It's there. my index I don't have it set incredibly heavy, but it's not hair. Like I can tap it like this and it won't go off, but it doesn't take a whole lot of back tension for I like it. I like it as soon as I start to think about adding back tension, it goes off, but it's heavy enough where like I got heavy gear on, my fingers are numb and I can lay that finger on there and I'm not worried about it going off. But I hate a hinge in the cold. I can make a thumb work. But so when you're talking like extreme cold, a lot of times we have like, higher collars or a neck gaiter that comes up here.
All that stuff that gets in the way.
Yeah.
And you're trying to pull through and.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the way, you properly anchor a thumb is your middle and index finger, lays across your jaw, top and bottom. So if you got material there, it can interfere with that. And it can actually, this is exaggerated, but it can actually, force you to be out, an eighth of an inch, a quarter of an inch. Well, an eighth of an inch, a quarter of an inch here at 20, 30 yards is going to be 2, 3, 4 inches. So you want to make sure you practice with that if that's what you're going to do, or you see that deer coming in and you pull everything down. So the reason I like the wrist strap is because it's on my wrist. I can shoot it with a little bit heavier glove. I still don't wear heavy gloves. I like a hand muff and a thin glove or those fingerless gloves. But if it gets cold, it is what it is. You gotta be warm. But I can wrap that thing around, and my anchor is my index knuckle right there, right in that divot. So it's a little higher here as opposed to here, right? And I can do that more accurately and more reliably, like with more material, like right here. So yes, when it gets cold, I'm talking like cold, like 20 degrees, 25 degrees, like that. I'm used to that. Like that, I'm fine with a thumb, but maybe a hinge. That's when I start thinking about, going towards that wrist strap. But yeah, it gets into late season. I just switch over to the wrist strap. Yeah. And that's something I started doing more like the last couple of years. Like I didn't do that for a lot of years and I never had a problem. But yeah, that material there, because you're trying to keep your neck warm and your head warm. It's like that really, I found that really interferes with your anchor point. And then, anything that changes here is way dramatic downrange. So if you can get that knuckle under your ear with that index and you're looking through that peep, there's no changes there. What you do got to worry about is just the material on your arm and just the bulk of everything, make sure your string's not hitting anything. So it's a challenge for sure.
Well, I missed, so that's why. I couldn't. The shot felt good coming off. It looked good through my peep.
You missed left to right or high.
He jumped a string. I missed a little high. But it was just a very awkward. It felt awkward when it doesn't usually feel awkward. But I hadn't hunted in that cold of a weather, and so it was the first time I'd pulled that jacket out, and I was just sitting there wondering, I wondered if an index release would be an easier release to shoot in that kind of a situation. So it made a lot of. So which index did you say you were shooting again?
It's called the Carter Quickie 2, which it's kind of an interesting design because the hook goes the opposite way of the hooks that you're normally used to seeing. It's on the same side as the trigger. And the reason it's like that is to eliminate face pressure. So the hook goes like this as opposed to like this. It is a release that Randy Ulmer used. Now the Stan Solex is a typical design, and I shoot that just fine. And you just got to make sure you're not getting, facial pressure there. If you got a lot of facial hair or something, that could cause problems. But they make a Carter Quickie. That's just the hook will be on the regular side. That's a good one. Carter Quickie, the Stan Solex, Stan Extinctions. Those are good. If you're looking for a decent, it's good. A budget release, trigger release. The True Ball Beast is a good one. It's like $90. It's got a decent trigger on it. Not a lot of adjustment, but what you want, if you're going to go with a trigger release, get a high quality trigger release. Don't get a True Fire. Don't get one of those real light ones. where you just lay your finger on, tap it, and it goes. And
you don't want that spot hog.
Yeah.
I can't remember I can't remember what it's called, but that thing, like, you barely tap it in the thing.
Yeah, the wise guy. But a lot of guys like that. A lot of guys like that, but that I don't do well with that. But I like one that has an adjustable trigger that has no travel. You don't want one where you're like squeezing, and then it goes off. You want something like a rifle. Just think about like a rifle. You wrap your finger around. You're not fearing that it's going to go off, and then you can pull. This is exaggerated, but you can pull like this. Or if you have the discipline and you've never had like target panic or anything, and you can execute it right, you can just squeeze, just like you would with a rifle. What you don't want to do is have your finger off the trigger and boom, that's a bunch of the trigger. You'll end up developing some bad habits, some anticipation, and you don't want one of those like true fires where it's like, I used it for a lot of years and it caused target panic, but like, you start squeezing, it's like, it takes a while. There's like a spring in there, and it takes a while for the jaw to open. So you're like squeezing, and then it just creates bad habits. So Carter, stands, I know True Ball, most of those higher end trigger releases are going to have a good trigger with no travel. You can adjust the tension, make it heavy, make it a little bit lighter, but that's what you want.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, I know this has been awesome. Like, how one of the things you said for people was find people that know what they're doing and ask them questions. Mm-hmm. That's literally why I started a podcast. As an older guy starting to hunt, I was like, this is the best way. I get to actually sit down and talk to some of the best hunters out there. So I really appreciate you taking the time out. Tell people, if they don't know where you are on Instagram or whatever, what's the best place for people to find you and like learn, watch your stuff, all that?
Yep. I don't really put a lot out there. I just have an Instagram account. That's kind of where I'll share like, hunting pictures and stuff. And, occasionally if I find something interesting scouting or a tip or something, I might throw it on there. I'm not trying to be like an educator or come off like I'm a hunting expert or anything. So I'm real cognizant about like what I put on there, but I love sharing. It's just like, going down to the archery shop before there was social media. Like, you wanted to see people's pictures. I like to share my pictures and, the adventures and stuff that I go on. I love seeing other people's. I'm always rooting for other people and my friends, and the hunting community. It's awesome. So I love being able to share and with that. I do a little bit of work for ASIO. So we're work a little bit on like product development there. So you might see me talk about ASIO gear or Tethered, the saddle company. I do some development with them too. And then I do some work with Spartan Forge as a mapping app. Similar.
Your Instagram is Bow Hunting Dad, right?
Bow Hunting Dad. Yep. Yeah. Yep. And Spartan Forge is like it's like similar to like an Onyx, but it's actually has a lot more capabilities and features. So
yeah, their stuff's great. I just had
worth checking out.
2 episodes ago. Their LiDAR and all that stuff is insane.
Very cool. Yeah.
Very cool stuff. So, hey, thanks for jumping on, Andy. I'm super appreciative of your time.
Yeah, no problem.
Great.
Yeah, really it was good. Fun. Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it, brother.
Yep.
This section of the podcast is brought to you by ASIO Gear. With its one-of-a-kind Raptor camo pattern, ASIO blends seamlessly into the whitetail woods. ASIO's features and technology are designed to fit the unique needs of the bow hunter. With a lifetime warranty, ASIO is designed by bow hunters for bow hunters. Use the code DONOTGO20 to get 20% off any order from the ASIO Gear website. Visit them at ASIOgear.com. Elevate your game with ASIO.